Hello, everyone. Welcome to my presentation today as part of the BIM Harambee Africa Conference. Let me introduce myself first to you before we go any further. My name is Noha, and I'm an associate professor at Middlesex University. My specialty is in digital technologies and construction, and I'm also the program leader for the BIM Management and Integrated Digital Delivery master's degree at the university. Now, my association with academia is coupled hand in hand by my professional association as well. I'm an architect by background, and I also consult on many projects in the industry, especially in design management and the initial planning phases of projects. And one of the things which have been really bothering me for many years is very much related to the topic that I'm going to talk about today, and is part of why I want to talk about it as well. And it's related to the objectives, business objectives of projects and why they actually create them. Now, as part of my industry involvement over the years, I've noticed that in many cases, there is lack of defining of why people are actually producing what they're producing. Why are projects being created? Is it just for the financial gains that are going to come out of selling a few flats or operating a few companies or whatever? Or are there deeper business objectives that are coming out of this asset? Especially if you're dealing as a developer who is creating multiple assets, different branches, for example. What are your goals and objectives, business ones, that you are creating this asset for? And hence why I want to talk today about the organizational and asset information requirements for using BIM on projects. And how does that relate to the theory that comes behind it and actually how we do it in practice? And this is something that I've been investigating and researching and practicing as well over the last few years. So without further ado, too much talk on the first slide. This is what I want to talk about today. So I would like to talk about a few definitions first. Theoretical definitions related to our current ISOs, our current standards that we have, specifically the ISO 19650 that just came out recently. And then we're going to talk about OIR, and OIR is short for Organizational Information Requirements, and then AIRs, which are Asset Information Requirements, and a few examples for practice that I want to advocate towards the end. Now, this topic I usually talk about and negotiate and discuss with clients in much, much longer time. But I will try to summarize as much as I can in 45 minutes or whatever's left of the 45 minutes. And hopefully I can direct you to more of where I have written about that later on. The main objectives behind today are, first of all, for us to think about or be able to define business objectives for creating our projects or our assets. How do we define the information needed within and to take from those assets based on the business objectives? How to create documents that show all of these objectives that we're talking about? Are there any key performance indicators that we can put into place to assess these objectives? And finally, how that can be the basis for a management workflow or processes and procedures going forward on projects. So I want to start by a few definitions, as I mentioned, a few theoretical definitions as per the ISO 19650, which is the most recent standard that is out there regarding information requirements and defining them on construction projects. So The first definition from the ISO is related to the OIR. What is an OIR that is advised to be created within the ISO? Basically, an OIR, or an Organizational Information Requirements document, is one which defines or stipulates the business objectives that the appointing party or the client wants from creating that asset or that building. So what information, what objectives do they want to achieve from that asset? And hence, what information should be taken into consideration within that asset, and what information should be retrieved on a strategic organizational basis from that asset. So the OIR basically feeds into the creation of the assets on the whole of that organization, and defines what information should be taken from that asset to satisfy the business objectives on the whole of all of the assets created by our organization. Of course, that can include strategic asset management, as you can see in front of you here, portfolio planning, any policies or regulations that are included. But this is sort of like an overall generic definition. Now, let's go on to the other definition that I want to talk about today, and that is the asset information requirements. This is a little bit different because this is based on the project itself. And while an organizational information requirements document can go synonymous with the business strategy of an organization, a 5-year business strategy, a 10-year business strategy, and hence an OIR that stipulates the information and the objectives of all of the assets across this 5-10 period time. The AIR could be generic, like the OIR. So if we're talking about, for example, a developer who is creating airport branches, or the TfL, for example, in the UK, where I'm based, where they create underground infrastructure, rail, underground tube stations, and all of that kind of thing. So they have repeated assets that they are creating, which are very similar to each other. In this case, you might create a generic asset information requirements document, an AIR, that works for multiple projects, but that might not be the case. So if your projects are not done on a repeat basis, they're different, you can create multiple different AIRs for multiple different types of assets. But what do they contain? They basically contain the standards that need to be put for the components and systems inside that building or inside that asset. And it also stipulates what kind of information need to be obtained for the client or for the appointing party from that asset. So what information do I need to collect about the components and the systems, the absolute individual components and systems of that assets? As you can see, this goes into a more granular level, where we are no longer at a high strategic level in the OIR, which stipulates the business objectives, but the AIR goes into details of the information of the actual components. So I just wanted to show you this diagram here, and I'm sure that a lot of you have already seen this, but it's essential to understand that the OIR stands at a higher strategic level that informs the AIR. Now, the other two documents, which I am not going to talk about today, are the PIR, the Project Information Requirements, and the Exchange Information Requirements. And while they can be overlapping, the Project Information Requirements, as you can see, is based on one particular project. It is not strategic to the organization. It defines the objectives of a particular project, which could be a little bit more prescriptive and more defined to a particular project than the OIR level. The EIR, or the Exchange Information Requirements, contains all of the details of the managerial and commercial and technical workflows and processes that the appointing party or the client wants to put in that particular project, and he or she or that organization also defines all of the information that they want to receive from that particular project. They basically put requirements for the supply chain to abide by and what they want that supply chain to give them back as information from that project. This is just an overall explanation about how these different documents connect to each other. It is important to stipulate at this point that all of these 4 different types of documents could be or should be part of the contractual documents to be taken into account during creating those projects. Now, let's talk specifically now about the OIRs and the AIRs, which is our topic of concern today. Now, I gave a very generic theoretical definition of how these documents or what these documents are. But let's now start looking into the practice. How do we actually create them? What should be inside them? And if you look around in case studies out there in the industry, you will find that there are very few OIRs and AIRs out there. There might be more EIRs that are being used, but when you come to create a document on a strategic level, that could sometimes be a bit tricky on what to put inside it. And from what I've seen and from my consultancy, a lot of the OIRs out there tend to be really generic and, excuse me for the word, a little bit wishy-washy. You don't really get any specific requirements and specific information from them that could inform the next design phases of each and every particular project. And this is the danger of OIRs. They can be so generic that you don't even use them for anything useful later on. So I'll just give you a little bit about how I was tackling this topic, how to create an OIR and AIR in what I believe is a more practical way of doing it. So let's start with information, okay? So OIR, AIR basically is about information requirements. So information requirements needs information categories. And information categories come out of trying to avoid or mitigate for risk categories. So the reason why we want information is to prevent risk, is to prevent problems that arise of risk. So the first thing that an appointing party or a client should do in order to create an OIR is define the risk areas that they want to mitigate for. And these could be many. I mean, as you can see here in front of you, they could be operational risks, business risks, supply chain risk, schedule risks. So quality risks, project planning risks. These are all different types of risks, which the client does not want to be put in. Furthermore, the client wants advantages or benefits. So after defining the risk categories, the client needs to think about what are the benefits that they want for themselves, the appointing party benefits. And these could be commercial, financial benefits. These could be legal benefits, human factor benefits, environmental benefits, which is something crucial that many clients now are putting into consideration, resource management benefits, okay? So it goes beyond just the risks and also into the benefits. Upon thinking about these, how does the client then start to think about how to write that as business objectives? And this goes on to what I created a few years back about a framework for writing an OIR. Now, if you will allow me, I will take you through this a little bit quickly because I'm aware of the time and I'll just keep my eye here on the time. From what I've investigated, I believe that an OIR should contain 7 major categories. Okay, I'll show them to you and then I will explain one by one with examples inside each. The first one, as you can see, is the aspired business goals and operational financial gains. That is basically what are the financial gains that the client can get out of creating those assets. Main financial gains, main business and financial gains. The second topic is spares, materials, and purchasing. So are there any particular business objectives related to handling spares, materials, and purchasing on all of the projects that this organization is creating? The third one is space management optimization. Again, we will discuss what this means later on. Asset management optimization, and they are different things. Space management is different from the asset management, which is even different from the estate management. So all 3 of them are completely different, as I will explain later on. The 6th one is human resource management. And lastly, automated systems enhancement, which is at the bottom. I'm going to talk about each of these 7 categories with examples in each. So let me start with the first one, and that's related to the business and financial goals. Now, the first example that I'm going to put here is one of the goals of creating those assets could be to record and analyze information related to user traffic flow inside the asset and rush hours inside the asset. So what have we got to? So if the client says that one of my business objectives is to have clear analysis and to improve the user traffic flow, especially during rush hours, and also to better inform staff allocations at different locations. Now, this could have many implications on the design phases that come later on. It is not simply a generic objective that the client is aiming to achieve. This could actually improve the time taken from going from one place to another inside the asset itself. And that could influence how that asset and its spaces are designed. It could reduce agitation, as you can see in front of here, improve the user experience, which encourages more people to come to that asset. I mean, think for a minute about an airport terminal. Of course, if you're booking a flight and you know that one particular airport has terrible reputation, you're going to try to book a ticket that does not transit within that airport terminal, for example. However, if that airport terminal has a good reputation for low time required for processing, it has a pleasurable experience of spending time inside it. There are no issues or problems regarding passing through that terminal, then more people will be encouraged to go through it. And that goes beyond the usability of the building. We are now talking about money. We are now talking about booking more flights that go through that terminal. We're talking about more sales because of engagement with maybe food and beverages and buying things from that terminal. So that goes beyond the design phase now. It goes beyond that into maybe also the transportation that is taking to and from that terminal. encouraging more airlines to maybe have flights that dock at that terminal. So you are now increasing the business that is coming to that terminal. So what other things? For example, health and safety issues, energy consumption. When you monitor the user traffic flow and try to minimize it, that will of course affect the energy consumption. It will improve the space allocation. It will improve the maintenance because there will not be the usual wear and tear of all of the different areas and components within that terminal. You will have an improvement of e-services and smart strategies within that terminal. So one very simple objective like that can affect a lot of things in the design and usability and the facilities management of that asset, and improve the financial gains and hence business objectives behind that terminal or behind that asset, whatever it is. I'm just giving an example of the terminal. Let's think about another type of objective. So monitoring the space temperature at different hours in different spaces, or monitoring the operations of the HVAC systems, the heating, ventilation, and AC systems, for example. That could be a business objective, again, to improve the financial gains behind improving the sustainability of that asset, for example. Another objective could be ensuring that the health and safety evacuation procedures happen within 3 minutes from any point in the asset. Now, this is where the business objective starts to actually have a key performance indicator within it. If you remember, one of the objectives that I showed at the beginning of the presentation was to have key performance indicators that will help achieve those business objectives. So why is that important? Let's talk about an underground tube station, for example. If we know that the evacuation processes and procedures take 6 minutes in case of fire alarms or things like that, that could be very detrimental to the usage of that terminal. So maybe one of the objectives would be to improve the current evacuation time to a certain evacuation time that is needed, or improve it by 50%, for example. Now, someone might say, why do we need to put a particular number to it or a particular percentage? Why can't we just improve it to the best possible? Well, how do you know what the best possible is? And this is part of what I was saying, that many of the OIRs which I have seen are so generic that you cannot really get anything out of them. If you say to the best possible, are you leaving it to the designer's evaluation? Are you leaving it to the user's evaluation? Are you leaving it to the regs evaluation? So let's say that you have particular building regulations in that country that stipulate that the maximum time for evacuation should not be more than 7 minutes. Mind you that building regs always give you the minimum allowed or the maximum allowed. But is that what you want for your asset in order for it to be competitive? Of course not. You want your asset to provide a better experience, which will encourage more people to use it, which will encourage more financial gains because of the better reputation of that asset, and hence the better reputation of the client who is creating that OIR and developing those assets. So that is why it is sometimes quite important to put actual key performance indicators in the form of specific numbers or percentages in order to improve what was already happening before in the same organization's assets or in other organizations' assets, and make an improvement, a specific improvement here. This is another example, like reducing passenger journey and checkout time by 20%, for example, during peak time. So here is where we put a percentage instead of a certain numerical value. Optimizing access points of fast food and beverage sale points to gain 20% increase in revenue. That is a business objective which will affect how those food and beverage sale points are designed, for example. Reducing access time to surgery wards by 30% in hospitals. Let's say the NHS, which is the National Health Service here in the UK, decides that it wants to reduce the access time from the outpatient wards to the surgical patients wards by 30%, or maybe decrease the mortality rates by, I don't know, 20% by improving the hygiene of the functions of the spaces where the outpatients are, for example, so that they do not catch viruses, especially during these times, for example. So these are all business objectives for creating the new assets that are being developed. Okay, and this again goes down to what I was saying earlier. Who should we give the decision on how to do this? Do we give that to the designers? Are they going to do it according to their rule of thumb in design? Is it up to the appointing party to do it on their own? Should they have a consulting party with them in order to define what objectives would get them better reputation and quality and financial gains in future? So again, this is a very important dialogue where the appointing party or the client needs to have maybe representatives or consultants in order to help them in creating that OIR document. This is another example of a business objective: improving space occupancy, let's say, of the university facilities or the student accommodations, for example. And that could be, so one of the ideas that, for example, I'll tell you about that we had at the university, because we are during these pandemic times, the housing facilities of students are not going to be taken up by students throughout a whole term or throughout the whole year. So maybe there could be a strategy by increasing the number of students that can have access to these facilities by leasing it out or renting those rooms out per month, because the university, for example, was thinking of having some classes come during part of the term and not during others. So maybe the housing facilities could also be shared with students. Reducing congestion at stations by X%. I'm just giving you more examples now, okay? Lower CapEx costs for future financial forecasting. So these are all examples of operational financial goals and objectives that can be put inside the OIR. So this is one category. Let's move on to the second category, and that is related to the space management, the spares, materials, and purchasing. What can we put in that category? What could be the objectives, business objectives that are put in that one? For example, one business objective could be to simplify and reduce the amount of spares that are stocked for maintenance and replacement within the assets belonging to this organization. Of course, this has a lot of financial benefits and financial gains, because there will be reduction of time wasted and costs wasted to do that. There will be less resources wasted. Some of these spares might get damaged by being stored for long periods of time. So as we say, how would that affect us going forward? It will affect how the design of that building is done, the type of materials chosen in it, the logistics of storing materials and replenishing equipment, the longevity and the life expectancy of the equipment used inside that building, the way that we specify the suppliers, the supply chain who are going to be involved with creating and maintaining those buildings, whether we use asset tags, for example. These are all things that should be taken into consideration in building and maintaining the assets based on that particular business objective. Let's look at other business objectives related to spares and materials. Identifying parts associated with speeding repair time. So we're specifically talking about repair times now. For example, using just-in-time adoption for maintaining and operating the facilities. Planning modifications and refurbishments, reusing, recycling, managing the waste disposal. So again, going back to that waste and becoming lean in the facilities and operations management, that is a very, very important objective. Someone might say that we can also put a percentage here, like reducing damaged parts by 20% that are used for resourcing the maintenance operations, for example. So these are all different ways that these kinds of objectives could be written. The main idea is to write your objectives underneath that particular title. Put that particular title into consideration and write the objectives, the business objectives that you want underneath that particular title. The third title that I want to talk about here is the automated systems enhancement. Okay, so the automated systems enhancement could be increasing the cybersecurity measures, for example. Now, someone can ask, is there a percentage that one can put for increasing the level of security? Of course not. You want 100% security. So it doesn't make sense to actually put a percentage here. But there are other things that could be asked for, like improving the data exchange flows, for example, especially if you're going to consider employing robotics, big data analytics, Internet of Things, the things that related to futuristic industry 4.0, smart buildings in your own right. How do you encourage the improvement of the data exchange across that? Improving the audit reports and the work processes and strategies. Okay, now let's go on to the next ones. I'm aware of the time, so I will try to be a little bit quicker here. So the next one is related to the space management optimization. Now, how do we optimize usage of space? Now, we need to take into account the type of users, not just the number of users, what their activities are, what are the resources required, the characteristics of the occupants themselves, not just the numbers of them. So that could be one objective. Another one could be to improve the move between the different spaces. So for example, at lunchtime, you don't have everybody coming out of their offices and there's congestion, for example. So you could say enhancing the move and churn by 20%, for example. Improving the daily and monthly space allocations. Putting KPIs for to assess the efficiency of the space management. Improving the furniture resources and how these are reallocated, the logistics of reallocating them between different rooms or between different branches, for example, and how that affects the carbon footprint. If you are moving these using trucks or whatever from one building to another. So again, the sustainability comes into account here. Okay, asset management optimization, which is different from the space management. This includes the condition of the asset itself, improving the condition. Better preventative and predictive maintenance strategy, which include sustainable strategies as well. Using the soft landings implementation for user satisfaction, so improving the user satisfaction and lowering the overall operational and life cycle costs. Now, regarding the next one, which is the estate management, as we can see here, this is related to partnerships. So maybe improving or obtaining more partnership opportunities. Maybe you will want to lease the properties as opposed to selling them, for example. So improving the overall financial gains. Maybe outsourcing certain activities, outsourcing the facilities management, or outsourcing some particular activities that are happening within the assets themselves. Improving the workflows with professional bodies and public bodies. Improving the logistics themselves. Waste management, as we mentioned before. And the last topic which I want to talk about here regarding the categories that you can write inside an OIR are related to human resources and managing them. And this could be a pretty queer one, a pretty odd one, because usually when you are creating assets, you basically want business and financial gains. Human resource management is not usually looked at as something that can give you financial benefits. But if you look at it from the point of view of enhancing the morale of the people who are working in that place, then this will improve the financial gains as well, because you will have less turnover of the people who are working there, which means that you will retain the tacit knowledge and experience that they have. You don't have to keep training people who are coming over at very high turnover speeds. In addition to that, you will have their loyalty, more productivity, less engagement, so more quality in the work that is being produced, and overall better financial gains. So provisions for recruitment, better recruitment and placements, better training and educational professional development of these people. All of this will add to the loyalty and the productivity of those people, which will improve the overall financial benefits for the organization, for the appointing party who is creating that OIR. And of course, knowledge transfer and better knowledge management to retain the experience within the organization. So these are all examples of the type of objectives that can be written under those 7 categories. Now, how do we actually write that as a document? I'm going to quickly show you. So what I have been proposing for the organizations I have been consulting for is to create something as simple as a table, as you can see in front of you. You can have an attached document where there is details written prescriptively about that particular table, but I believe that table makes things very, very practical. So basically what I've advised doing is writing each and every objective here, as you can see in the rows. Okay, so each and every objective in the categories I mentioned, like reducing access time to surgery ward by 30%. So you write that in that particular row. Now, for each of these objectives, there are particular pieces of information, hence organizational information requirements. Each and every column contains information that needs to be fed into the design phases and construction and operations phases, and needs information to be given back as a result. Now, what are these pieces of information? I've written them in the columns. So first of all, the organization ID, for example, and then who is responsible for dealing with that particular objective? Is it the designers? Is it the constructors? So basically, what are the appointed parties in each of these projects that need to handle that particular objective? Who's responsible for that particular objective? Who is the risk owner? So, sorry, who would be held accountable to mitigate if things go wrong with that particular objective? Who is the financial owner of that particular objective to make it happen and for its mitigation, for example? What are the particular project information requirements that need to be given back to the organization that show satisfaction of that objective? What are the acceptance criteria or key performance indicators or methods and procedures that need to be done in order to ensure achieving that objective? Maybe standards that need to be taken into account. What supporting documents besides the standards and tolerances and all of these kinds of things, what other supporting documents can we link here that would help us achieve those objectives or this particular objective? Is there a start and end date? And that goes basically to how long this OIR is active for. So if this OIR goes hand in hand with the strategy plan of the organization, which is, let's say, a 5-year plan, so maybe the start date could be the beginning of those 5 years and the completion date, the end of those 5 years. So these are all information that relate to that particular objective that will help achieve that objective, and with those KPIs, for example, will help us receive information about achieving those objectives. That is very, very important, in my opinion at least, that should be put in a table like this. I've included here a few other things which could be put. So if those particular objectives relate to certain project types, then maybe we could have an additional column for project type if that organization creates more than one type of projects. Also, the percentage of level of objective completion. Remember when we talked about putting a percentage or a numerical value that could help with achieving the objective. Or maybe the level to which it was completed before, so that one would know what is the improvement percentage that needs to be done now. Now, very quickly, in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to refer to asset information requirements. There is not enough time to go in depth about this, but like the organization information requirements, I have also advocated certain categories where the asset information needs to be collected. So the first one is related to the actual equipment and systems that need to be maintained inside the asset itself. So maybe a different drainage system, the different valves and boilers, electrical systems, intercom systems, and each one of them having its own particular piece of information that define it, how it should be, the wattage levels, the electrical heat consumption. Of course, I'm not an electrician, I'm an architect by background, but I'm just mentioning what are the levels and standards that should be achieved in each and every component within that asset, and hence collecting information about it. The other one here is related to the standards and classifications that are to be used as a benchmark for these components within the asset. The third one is how is the information going to be stored about these components, and how is it going to be exchanged between the different parties, especially when we're talking about FM and OM stages, facilities and operations management. What are the different characteristics and attributes that need to be collected about each of these components or systems? Are there going to be any asset tags that are going to be used, for example, RFIDs, whatever? Who is responsible for collecting these information? And we're not talking about personnel per se, but roles. Which roles are responsible for collecting the information? Who is held responsible, accountable for any errors that come in this area? The time frequency of collecting the information, okay? And who is responsible for the procedures and the workflows, the sign-off procedures at various milestones of handling these equipment, maybe designing them, installing them, operating them, maintaining them, and the difference between verifying the information and validating that it's useful, because verifying a piece of information does not mean that it's useful. And finally, any key performance indicators that are required to assess that the different components and systems are functional. So again, how can we put all of these in a document that would be useful? I'm going to show you now a way of doing that, but I just wanted to mention that all of these categories would help create what is called an asset management strategy, how to actually do the asset management operations and planning the particular activities that go along with it. Okay, so like the OIR, I also advocated for my clients who I consulted on their projects with, creating a table, just like in my opinion, I'm a very practical person. So in my opinion, this was extremely practical on how this was to be done. So what I did is that I put each system on the side, and underneath each system, each and every component that needs information on. Basically, the information that needs to be put in place and collected, okay? Because that is what the client or the appointing party wants in it. So for each component, in the columns, as you can see, I have put the different attributes of each component, the standards and classifications that are used as benchmarks to adhere to for the qualities of that component. Who are the information containers for the component, as I said, per role, not per name, okay? Who is to sign off on collecting and maintaining that information? Maybe you can add an extra column for who is responsible for mitigating any errors in the collection. The format of the information that is to be collected and how it's going to be stored. How often is that information going to be collected? Any key performance indicators for the performance of that component, maybe using BRIAM, LEED, any other type of system. And finally, any link to documents related to that component. Now, just one point here I wanted to mention, that this could actually be a live document per se, especially if at the beginning of the project, we're not absolutely sure who are the subcontractors who are going to come in place to help us fill out this document. The reason I am mentioning this is because if the AIR is going to be part of a contractual document, it cannot be live if it's part of a contractual document. Therefore, if we know that the AIR is going to go through phases of completion or adding to, then we must be careful that when the next iteration or added information or addendum is added to that AIR, maybe an addendum to the original contract or a new contract should be put in place to take that on board. These are other things which I also put in place, maybe costs, frequency of failure of the component. Maybe we have to have a key performance indicator for that as well. Now, the last things which I want to mention here is who would actually fill this. It could be the lead appointing, it could be the appointing party if they have their own consulting teams and if this is repeat business, that they are used to creating many assets which have the same components, so maybe they already know in advance how to fill this all in. But if not, then maybe they need the expertise of the lead appointed parties or the sub-appointed parties that come later on, like subcontractors or manufacturers who would help fill this in. So again, this is something that the client or the appointing party needs to take into account at the beginning when they're discussing that. Okay, now we all have heard of COBE. Now, where does COBE lie in all of this? In my opinion, COBE is the answer to this. So this is the question. This is where we are asking for the information that we want in the asset, but the COBE actually gives us the reply or the actual information that we have implemented within the project. What is the relationship between that and the asset information model? They should go hand in hand, of course. We don't necessarily in the asset information model need to put prescriptively all the families with all the details of all of the equipment of all of the components. We could have placeholders inside the AIM, and those placeholders have a link to external files or models containing the details, the prescriptive details and models of these particular components. And as I said, I believe that the BIM execution plan to the exchange information requirements, it's the answer to it, just like the COBE is the answer to the AIR. And in conclusion, this is basically what I wanted to achieve today, that how do we define the business objectives in the categories that I mentioned, the information that needs to be recorded in the table, and hence how we write that organization information requirements document, its relationship to contracts, what key performance indicators could be put in place, and finally, how that could be the basis of managing projects later on, which will be informed by what we're doing here. Of course, I am not able to take questions live from you now. I would have been happy to, but please feel free to contact me if there are any questions that you would like to ask about. And this is one publication that where I have put a lot of details and more description of what I was talking about here today. It was a pleasure talking to you today, and hopefully I can see you in other webinars or seminars that I give in other places and more discussions. Have a great day. Bye-bye for now.